All right, next up we have Marc. Let me put the spotlight on you. Hello, thank you so much for joining us. This is Marc
Hello, Sarah.
Zarefsky.
How are you?
We are here to talk about higher ed, which I'm very excited about because I don't know if it's just me, but it feels like it's been on fire for about 18 months at least, coincidentally with the pandemic. So I'd love to hear maybe what brought you into some work in the higher ed space and what's kept you there. What's been interesting and fun about it?
Absolutely. First off, Sarah, thank you for having me here. I'm excited to talk, and it's been incredibly valuable listening to Pamela and Liz and Mindy, everybody so far. My backstory is actually pretty similar to Mindy's. I didn't want to be in Afghanistan, but I grew up thinking I wanted to be a sports writer, and everything I did in college was preparing me to cover sports for a living. And I started working as a sports writer for a few years, and I quickly discovered that it wasn't the sports that I necessarily cared about and was passionate about. It was telling the athlete stories. And so it was taking people behind the scenes and letting them in to the lives of these people, the work that they had to put in, but it was the people, it wasn't the games. And so eventually, after a few years, I transitioned into a more marketing communications angle. And my first job was in higher ed. And I just sort of got hooked, because what I always loved about sports is no 2 days were the same. You will never see the same game twice. There's always something different. So you always have a different story to tell. And the same is true in higher ed. When you think about it, you've got different audiences that you're working with, but you're telling different stories. And for me, it's always about storytelling. So whether or not you are promoting content to a prospective student, or you're highlighting faculty research, or you're spotlighting an alum, the content is all different. And no 2 days are the same. There's always more content to come, and there are more stories to tell. And I've been in higher ed either on a full-time basis or now as a self-employed freelancer for 11 years now, and I've loved it.
It sounds like there are different audiences going on already. So you mentioned student feature. So there's university to student, like actual communications from the institution. And then there is B2B higher ed, where it's like all the technology that an institution might use. Have you done both, or focused on the internal?
So it's interesting. And when you first reached out to me, I was thinking about the B2B versus B2C. And yes, technically, I would say higher ed is, and for the most part, is B2C, because you are going directly to the consumer. But when you think about it, it's really much more like B2B, because it's not a one-stop shop. It's not, okay, I'm selling you this one thing and then you're never going to hear from me again, or I'm not going to see you again. People considering universities for undergraduate, graduate, this is a huge commitment, and it takes them a long time to decide what the right option might be, or if they want to even do it. And so there's a whole nurturing component to it that could take months, it could take years. And so I think in that realm, you can think of it more as a B2B component. And then even if somebody does come to the university, then you're talking to them as a student. And then when they graduate, guess what? You're talking to them as an alum. So it's really almost lifetime communication. So it is B2C, but I think it's also B2B. My major focus has been on we'll call it the consumer side of that B2B, where I'm working with students and alums. But it's, I think, in a lot of sense, the ways that you're sharing that content is the same.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Cool. Yeah, because most of my experience in the space has been technology products that have come out with a institutional focus or product. And so they're marketing to institutions and trying to like speak to those needs of directors and leadership and all the things that are changing. So there's just a lot of different ways to work with institutions. And I wonder, have you had success reaching them one-on-one? For me, all of that work has come through agencies. I don't think I've ever connected with an institution and worked for them directly, but it sounds like that's what you do.
Yeah, that's been the major way that I've worked. And I've gotten I've been fortunate to work with some of the top journalism schools, business schools, engineering schools in the country. And Mindy said it's really been referral based, being able to rely on your network and have someone say one nice thing to you to someone else, and all of a sudden you have a new potential client. I know lots of people who have gone the agency route also to get involved. It's one of the things that's interesting is there are so many different angles and so many different routes that you could take. So I've been fortunate to, like I said, work directly with directors of marketing at some of these schools and to facilitate that the communication that they're doing with their different audiences. And like I said, there are different audiences within this angle. You've got your prospective students, you've got your current students, you've got your faculty for their thought leadership, and then you have alumni. And how you communicate and what you communicate with them is obviously different based on where they are in the process.
What about the traits that make up the best kind of writers? So I know storytelling is clearly an important theme, but what else has been important for you that institutions seem to really want?
I think I loved what Mindy was just saying about a desire, obviously being a good writer, but really a desire to learn. I've found this, and I think this has certainly been true throughout my career, this curiosity of just wanting to understand more and being able to dig into a topic that you may not be an expert in or even remotely close to an expert. I've been fortunate to write about a wide variety of topics from, like I said, from journalism to robotics to artificial intelligence and biotechnology. These are topics that I came in with little to no knowledge about. But I think one of the things that is really valuable for this niche, but really I think for any in general, the writing that I'm doing, it doesn't need to be overly technical. And in fact, a lot of times what it is, it's taking technical topics and humanizing it so that anybody could understand it and could relate to it. So being able and comfortable to ask questions, understand a topic enough so that you feel not like you're an expert, but you can convey the important messages to someone who might not understand it. On the flip side, if you're communicating with a prospective student, you need to be proficient enough. So you have to walk this fine line of knowing enough that you can understand it, but then not needing to feel like you need to be an expert in everything that you're doing with it. So the desire to be curious, asking questions, and then I think really the biggest thing is being able to translate that knowledge into something that anyone could understand.
Yeah. And that seems to be just such a strong theme for everything today, is it's like your niche doesn't come from being an expert. That's why we have subject matter experts. It comes from being really curious and then exploring that curiosity.
Yeah, exactly. And like I said, I would not call myself a robotics expert. The journalism program I picked, one of the reasons I loved was because there was no real science requirement. So I'm not a science person, but certainly during the last 18 months, focusing on biotechnology, I've learned much more. And I feel like I can be conversational and translate that information in a somewhat reasonable way.
Yeah. And I'm thinking of the B2B higher ed projects I've been a part of, and those themes come out too, because I wouldn't say I'm an enterprise resource planning ERP technology specialist by far, but writing white papers and infographics and doing surveys on behalf of a technology that does that for institutions was in my wheelhouse, because I was really curious how they organized departmentally. How do they make decisions about what technology they buy? What kind of things can an institution do when they have that kind of planning capability? Just following the white rabbit through all of that was really exciting and fun. And then same for learning management systems that institutions bring in when they're all going remote. So writing for Blackboard and D2L, Absorb, like a couple other places that are now targeting higher ed institutions because everybody's moving their curriculum online. So it's just having that curiosity.
Yeah. And I think also for when you're focusing on that B2B route, being able to understand how the schools are using that product or how they could benefit from that product. But I think in many ways that's very similar to even the communication that you do with prospective students. Liz was talking about how some companies, they have this product and they just get so excited about the product that they don't really think about the audience that they're communicating with. For a prospective student, you can't just say like, this is an amazing program, you should come here. And you could try and maybe that'll work a little bit, but really you need to say, look, this is how this program will help you grow and it will help you move forward and it will help you be able to do X things after this. In the same way, I think that you're talking about with those products, if you're a B2B writer or a representative from that company, you want to be able to come to the school and say, hey, this will allow you to do this. This will help you make you do your job easier, more effectively. So I think there are a lot of similarities in that regard.
Yeah, and that reminds me, one of the products or something, it was talking about student lifecycle marketing. So bringing more complex automation to an institution so that they can track one prospective student through like prospective studentness, through being a student, through later, did they drop out or are they still going to classes, and like integrating all this data that they have about people. And then the ethics of that was a whole other white paper. So it's like digging into these new things that are happening and how they're using technology to better serve students is just this whole pool you get to play in when you're writing.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. There are so many opportunities and there are so many niches within higher ed that you could focus on. You could be a writer for one university and do a whole bunch of, be more spread out and do different topics, or you could specialize in one topic and then market yourself out to other universities, for example.
I wonder, are there any other kind of big content types or even content themes that you come across a lot? Like when you sit down to write for an institution, what do you end up writing about that you might not have seen coming?
Yeah, and I think there's the variety that you can do in terms of formats. You can have your standard article, you can do white papers, you could do thought leadership ghostwritten pieces, you could do magazine articles, you can do all of those things. And I think it really depends on what the goal is for the institution and obviously what the goal is for the audience that you're trying to communicate with. So if you're working on an email nurturing campaign for prospective students, you may have a set of 7 emails, and one of them, it could be a spotlight on an alum who went to the school, took the lessons they learned, applied it to start their own company, and now they're making bajillions of dollars. That could be one email. Then you have a secondary email that spotlights a course that maybe even that one alum took, and you can dig deep into that course. Then you can do one on a faculty member. So there's so much variety there that, like I said, no 2 days are the same and no 2 assignments are the same. You could do the exact same email nurturing campaign for 2 different programs within a school, and you could follow that same format and still be talking about such very different content. So the theme and structure would be similar, but the content would be very different.
And every project is different, obviously, but about how much control or direction do you have over putting that together? Are you the person suggesting a 7 email sequence and then pitching some topics, or do they come to you and say, we need to engage our people? What ideas do you have for that?
I think it's both, and it depends on the client that you're working with. I know one of the questions you've been asking people is, how do you show your value? And I know you've been asking about pricing and that sort of thing. Being able to pitch those ideas is obviously a phenomenal opportunity. So maybe you start writing articles for a university that maybe they're just showing up as blog posts, for example. And then you talk with your editor and say, hey, are you guys doing nurturing emails right now for prospective students in this topic? If not, could we repurpose those articles into emails? Or could we take lessons from guest speakers in a class and turn that into a white paper that gets distributed out to alumni, for example, to showcase what topics the school is focusing on right now? So I think the options are unlimited. I think in some cases, if you're an established writer working with someone for a few years, they know your expertise, your experience, and they may say, okay, this is what we want to focus on now. But I think certainly, and this is true for any niche, and I think any writing in general, if you've got an idea that you think could help, by all means, pitch it out. And the worst thing that happens is they say no.
Yeah. I love that. I feel like this feeling has come up with everybody we've spoken to, but I haven't mentioned it till now. But finding a niche where you really have a desire to help the people you're working for, I can't think of anything that makes it easier to brainstorm ideas and bring that kind of partnership thing to it. Because just the way you talked about come up with these ideas and then bring this course into it, like the energy that you had immediately just really showed. So I feel like that could be another sign of what a good niche is. When you start learning about their email marketing, when you start reading about their programs and how you're going to help, do you feel this lean to really dig in and help and come up with all these ideas and stuff for them?
Oh, absolutely. Obviously, it makes it like you want to have fun doing what you're doing. This is why we're all doing being our own bosses.
We forget sometimes, but yes, I understand that's the premise.
Absolutely. But no, I've done work with one client where, one of the key drivers for it, one of their big statements that they claim is you're going to get a degree in this, but you can go out and do so many other things with this degree. And I talked with my editor, my contact, and we were talking through it. And he said, we could turn this into a whole ebook where we focus on a dozen different industries that you could go into with this degree. And then we can spotlight the industry. But while we're doing that, let's talk to alums who are in those fields to help support this content. Now we have an ebook about this. But then we also had these interviews with the alumni that suddenly turns into additional alumni spotlights, for example. It's that same curiosity, but it's really being able to focus on what their goals are and what will help push them forward. And then really just being as creative as you can to figure out new and fun ways to tell those stories.
Yeah, it's blown my mind because it almost brings like a SaaS lifetime customer value model to a student. So they've already invested $50K in you. Give them a little spotlight and then that feed your marketing flywheel. That's really interesting.
Well, and it keeps alumni engaged. If you're doing an alumni story, obviously it's showing that the program values you and they want to put you up as a great example of what you can do. So it shows that you matter, but it also shows that they want to keep connected and they want to let you know about how the school is continuing to push forward and continuing to innovate.
And so I wonder, I'm going to reveal my own ignorance here because I'm so used to taking the B2B angle where I know they have a product to sell, so I'm going to dive in there and pitch a white paper. When it comes to pitching an institution or even getting hired, is that process very different? Because the times I've tried to work for my alumni, it felt like you had to find this really weird job board and submit like a 50-page resume, and then it was $20 an hour. It's just, what is happening?
Yeah.
So how is that process different?
I think every institution is different. Every setup is different. I think being able, and again, I don't mean to say this is true for all niches in all industries, but being able to figure out the right person to get in touch with and being able to connect with them and show your value, that's the game changer. And maybe I think for people getting started who are maybe looking to just get a little bit more experience, you can obviously start with your own institution that you went to, whether it's pitching an article to an alumni magazine or even a marketing director within the school that you went to, but also turning to LinkedIn and seeing if there's anyone out there that either is working at a school that you're interested in or may be able to connect you with someone. So you've got to be creative. You've got to be willing to knock on a lot of doors, but recognize that any door you knock on, the worst thing that's going to happen is they're not going to respond. And then you move on to the next one.
Mm-hmm. And that there's like dozens of hundreds of doors.
There are lots and lots of doors.
Cool. And Liz shared, based on recent trips to visit colleges, I'd say reach out to the admissions office. They need marketing and could hire you or put you in touch with someone who hires writers at the university.
Yeah. I think in multiple instances for me, the content I'll create will support admissions, but it'll be from the marketing department. And so understanding the relationship there. But yeah, by all means, contact admissions. And if they don't do it, they can put you in touch with the right people who do.
Cool. And I wonder, when it comes to research, so this might not be as helpful on the like marketing material side, but if you're writing for a tech product for an institution, do you have any research or places for thought leadership you like to go?
I'm trying to think I don't know if I'd have anyone specifically for that. I would just say, and this is just very general, but with any topic that you're writing about, it really is just diving in and figuring out what angle is necessary to take to get the background info. I've done thought leadership for ghostwritten thought leadership for faculty members, where
cool.
That is, again, a higher level of knowledge than I have, certainly. So it's still getting that background information and figuring out what their message is and how they want to deliver it. Again, Mindy had the great advice of asking stupid questions. A lot of times in my interviews, I'll say, this sounds like a very obvious question, but I'm going to ask it anyways, so that you can hear and understand what people are going to say, but also what people are looking for. So I think, in going back to your question, in that research, don't be afraid to ask stupid questions, if that makes sense.
Yeah, cool. I had a couple that I threw in the chat. As simple as doing like a Google search for higher ed tech, and that'll give you actual products that you could check out and pitch. Also, state of higher ed. Anybody who works in higher ed is probably doing original research on higher ed and then releasing that as a study. Mm-hmm. So you can go and read that for ideas, but then also use that as your own lead generation and send that to prospects saying, hey, I saw blah, 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 blah is happening. Have you thought of doing something about that? And it lets you start a conversation that does not seem self-serving, but really positions you as someone there to help in the beginning.
Absolutely. Anything that shows not only your value, but that you understand what they need and what they're looking for, that's gold right there.
Cool. And I wonder, maybe for my final question, unless somebody pops into the chat, which is fair game, but what would you consider to be the pros and cons of being in this space? So like stuff that still gets you really excited, and then stuff that could roll an eyebrow for someone else that they might not enjoy.
I would say the pros, as I mentioned already, like being able to focus on so many different things, different topics, and get to know and talk with so many interesting people. I've been fortunate to interview CEOs of companies who are doing game-changing work in so many different fields because they went to this school and went to this program. And not only I was able to talk to them about what they're doing, but really how the school helped them get to where they are. So I've been able to make really cool connections about that and learn things that I never thought would get me excited. I didn't like writing about IT. Probably if you asked me 5 or 10 years ago, like it wouldn't have really gotten me all that excited. I love it. And I love doing that now. The biggest cons, one of the challenges can just be timing. And again, I'm sure this is true in any niche, but people are very busy, particularly when you're trying to communicate with faculty or, again, alums who maybe haven't been in touch with a school for a long time. You may be waiting for a while to get their feedback or to get an initial interview. And so that can occasionally be tough. But for me, certainly the pros have far and away outweighed the cons.
Yeah, cool. And so Mary Kate asks, does having higher ed experience become an advantage? So if you have been a volunteer or an adjunct professor, is there a way to leverage that?
I think absolutely. Anything you can do to differentiate yourself is what gives you a leg up. So even if you can say, you understand the admission cycle or you understand X component, it shows that you have a little more knowledge. When I first started, my higher ed experience was going to college, and that was it. But so yeah, anything that you can do to make yourself stand out, absolutely go for it.
Yeah. And I would pile on to that. It doesn't matter what you think about that as much as what they think about that. So
Exactly.
you might be discounting, I just went to college, or I just have a master's, or I just was an adjunct professor for one semester and my student reviews weren't that great. They don't know or care about any of that. What they see is someone coming up and saying, hey, I've done blank, which means I could probably do blank for you. And that's as simple as the story is for them.
Absolutely.
Cool. Man, thank you so much, Mark. I feel like
my pleasure.
This has
Thank you.
given people a door into higher ed, which can take you to really cool places.
As a side note, if you enjoyed our conversation today, I want to encourage you to check out the B2B Writing Career Kickstarter. This is the all-in-one class that introduces you to B2B, helps you figure out your niche, and then a couple times a year, we actually get together and write your first clips together. If you'd like more information about that, just click the link in the course below or head to b2bwritinginstitute.com. Thanks for joining.